Broken clock, its hands run dry. Old photographs, edges torn, memories fading. Where love was born.
Today we're speaking with someone whose work is woven into the very fabric of rock history. If you grew up with records that felt larger than life, that sounded like entire worlds you could walk into, there's a good chance you were hearing the work of Ron Nevison. His engineering and production shaped the sound of artists like Led Zeppelin, Ozzy, Chicago, Jefferson Starship, The Who, and many more, whose music became defining chapters of people's lives. Ron comes from an era where the studio was a sanctuary and a battleground at the same time. Tape was finite, every take mattered, and the red light meant the moment was forever. Yeah, he also stands as one of the rare figures who successfully bridged the leap from the golden age of analog to the limitless world of digital recording. Few have witnessed that evolution from such a vantage point, and even fewer helped shape at every step. Ron, it's truly an honor to have you here today. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Ron, when you were working with artists like Led Zeppelin or The Who, walking into the studio carried a certain energy, almost ceremonial. On day one, what were the signs that told you this band is ready or a single note was even recorded?
They were ready. These were not young bands. These were not their first albums. Led Zeppelin had just turned in Houses of the Holy, and I picked up from that with Physical Graffiti. I only recorded the first 9 songs. I didn't even know until it came out that they had added another bunch of songs from outtakes from the Houses of the Holy and made it into a double album because I was off working on other projects. My first few albums, luckily enough, were with big bands, and I was very lucky to have that opportunity. In the case of The Who's Quadrophenia, again, The Who had done Tommy and had done Who's Next, and were ready. Pete had now written this rock opera with Jimmy instead of Tommy inserted, and he wanted to do it in quadrophenic sound, which was a new thing that his parent company, MCA, was tinkering with. They had these converters or, whatever, that took 2 out-of-phase channels from the stereo on a disc and put them through bullshit.
Yeah.
In reality, the front to back separation was like 3 dB. It was like a big mono. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Pete wanted to do it in quad, and in London, there were no quad studios. So Pete decided to build his own studio, which means he'd have quad panners, he'd have quad monitoring in the studio, etc. The studio was finished before the recording, but the mixing console was not finished. Now, at that time, this was 1973, I was actually working for Pete in a company called Track Plan, building studios for musicians, aside from other engineering stuff that I was doing. And I just built a mobile studio for Ronnie Lane of the Faces. Pete and Ronnie were buds. They grew up together in Twickenham. They were both into Mayor Baba at that time. They're real close. And so Pete said, hey, can you get Nevison to bring the mobile studio over to the kitchen, I think we called it, studio, Ramport. Bring it over to Ramport, and we need to start cutting tracks. We're behind it. The console will be done in a couple of weeks. So, who better than to run this thing than the guy that built it, me. Also, I knew Pete. I caught a big break. If I hadn't done the job, cutting the tracks for Quadrophenia with the mobile unit, he wouldn't have kept me. I must say it wasn't, it was a big break, but I helped make the break. This was a massive band that I was a young engineer. They had all the demos. Pete was working, to go back specifically in that instance, Pete was working with synthesizers that were huge. The ARP-20 was a modular synth, and it was in big banks and all connected, and you couldn't save. There was no save button on this synth. So you had to dial in the oscillators and dial in the sound. There was a book that told you how to get a string sound. So you got the string sound, and then it drifted in tuning, and you got to recalculate it. You finally got it. You couldn't push save. You had to record right then. And then it would take another half hour to get another sound. So there was nothing saved in sound. So Pete built his own little studio at his house in Twickenham with a 16 track, and he would do rudimentary demos where he would do the drums really simple because he didn't want to piss off Keith Moon. And he'd do a really simple bass and just get it down and put the simple guitar and do the synth with a click track. And then he would bring in the tape into the studio and we play to that. And that's during the Quadrophenia record and the Tommy film too. That's how we made the records when it was synthesizer driven. If it was just regular tracks, we wouldn't re-record. We would, So, I mean, they were so ready, these bands. Even in the case of Physical Graffiti, Led Zeppelin, they were so well rehearsed.
That's awesome.
I was not the producer on these.
No, you're the engineer.
Yeah, Pete and Jimmy Page in the case of Led Zeppelin, and they were just very consummate music.
Yeah. Now, as far as the difference in the roles of a producer and engineer, do you want to elaborate on that? The producer is more the creative visionary, right?
The analogy is the producer is the film director and the engineer is a cinematographer. Do you want to think of it like that? And so if you're the cinematographer and the film director at the same time, you're a producer engineer like I am. Now, when I worked with those bands and the producers were the musicians, there wasn't another producer. They were out there in the studio. They had to rely on me and often did. What do you think, Ron? It's a little bit different. I come from a different background than most. I should point that out. Aside from musical background, I'm not talking about that. I spent 2 years in the late 60s mixing live sound with a company, touring the United States. And so I came from a live performance aspect to this, which is different than most engineers that get a job in the studio and they work their way up as an engineer. I was already a live mixer before I took a job at Island Studios. I was on tour with Trafficked, which Steve Winwood joined a tour with, and Chris Blackwell gave me a break. He was the head of, he was Island Records, and he was also Steve Winwood's manager. And so I was just luckily in a car with him on tour somewhere like Ohio, who knows? And I was complaining. I'm fucking tired of hauling this gear around, man. It's burning me out. There's a lot of stories about being on the road. This was in the 60s though. And I wasn't flying to gigs. I was driving the truck and then unloading and then loading and then going out to the front of the house and doing the sound and then loading the gear and driving. He said, wow, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to take what I've learned mixing and go into the studio. And he said, well, I have a studio called Island Studios. You can work there if you want. And he hired me like on the spot.
It's beautiful.
So that's the transition that I felt was important.
Yeah.
For people to know. That was the transition that got me. It was a big move in 1970 for me to pull up stakes, and the pay at Island Studios was £15 a week, which is about $25 a week. So I had to go from making hundreds a week to $5 a week, but that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's what started my whole 5 years in England.
Background in live performances and mixing and during live performances definitely had a positive effect on your ability to record in the studio, obviously. So that's pretty awesome. Ron, with albums like Heart or Chicago 17, how did you determine whether a demo already captured the emotional blueprint? You mentioned demos from like Pete Townsend. How did you determine whether or not the demo actually captured the emotional blueprint or whether the song needed to be rebuilt from the ground up?
As far as the demos go, a lot of times it gives you a chance to listen to the song. And when I listen to the demos of a band that they've done, I sometimes will make judgments on which songs, if there's too many songs, let's say, which songs are better from a song statement. But also I can see if the tempo, the key, the intro, the outro, the arrangement needs to change. And all of those things will be addressed once you pick the song. Now, for some artists, I brought songs that were already demoed to the artist. like in the case of, say, Heart. I know that when I got hired to do the Heart record, I know that Nancy had sung one song on each of the albums, but, Ann was the lead singer. So at some point in the process, I was looking for a song for Nancy to sing. And my manager at the time, Michael Lippman, so managed Elton John's Bernie Taupin, John's lyricist. Martin Page and Bernie had written this song, and they gave me this song when knowing I was going up to rehearse with Hart. And I listened to it on the plane. It was these trims. And I thought that would be perfect for Nancy because she's very dreamy, And I just thought, perfect. And, I didn't know if she'd like it. I didn't ever think it would be a single because she wasn't the lead singer of the band. Yeah. I mean, but it's only a story because of actually what happened. Also, What About Love is another song I brought to that. And they didn't like it. In fact, Nancy went downstairs crying.
That's one of their biggest hits, isn't it?
Yeah. But I said, look, let's work the song up, okay? If you can't make it into Heart, we won't do it. They started, working it up and turned it into a great song. They rocked it up a bit, toughened it up.
Yes.
But you have to look at, when I look back at Heart, they had one of the biggest albums ever, out of the box, we call it, in the late 70s with Dreamboat Annie. And they had this rare combination of, a chick that could scream like Ann Wilson, had an amazing voice.
Still does.
Stuff like Barracuda with great riffs, ding, ding, down, and down, right? Well, by the time 1982 came around, they had split up with their boyfriends that were in the band that wrote most of those things. The guitar player, the drummer, and they were writing stuff that that ruined the chemistry. And this is my opinion, folks, that ruined the chemistry in the band. They would probably never admit this. And so Epic dropped them. Imagine that after like 2 albums. They did this album called Passion Works. Didn't do anything. Epic dropped them. That's where Capitol came along and picked them up and said, I'll sign you guys if we can agree on a producer and the songs. So they really had to go along with this. But yeah, demos are still the lifeblood, really. I mean, it's the song, isn't it? It's how you judge. That's how artists get signed. Well, I was very lucky that the singers that I've worked with over the years, including Robert Plant, including Roger Daltrey, including, I did the first 3 albums with Bad Company. Paul Rogers, one of my most ever. I did an album with Barbra Streisand. Mickey Thomas, the singer in Starship. Amazing. I mean, I was very lucky to work. And of course, Ann, Melissa Manchester, I did an album with her. Yeah, I've been very lucky with the best.
What blows my mind is a lot of these people are still performing today, like Ann Wilson, The Last I Knew, and Mickey Thomas, and they still act too.
I remember Sinatra singing well into his 80s, wherever.
Yeah, beautiful voice. Yeah. There was no auto-tune back then either.
Right. I have a story about that. I wish I had it.
But recording bands like UFO or Jefferson Starship with Mickey Thomas, of course, and Grace Slick, I don't know if she was in the band at the time.
Yeah, she was.
Sessions were limited by tape and costs. Did that pressure bring out performances we might not get today in the digital era?
No.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so at all. We never walked into the studio thinking we got to get, I didn't. Maybe if you were, you can erase things and you can go over tape. You don't want to go over it too many times. But that was never a consideration.
It's awesome. Well, you worked with a lot of great artists, and so you didn't really have constraints. Now, today we can tune, time correct, sample, and replace. Prior to working in those analog days with artists like Ozzy or Kiss, the fix it in the mix mentality changed the soul of recording for better, worse, or simply different.
I think for better. I don't know about the mentality so much, but the fact that things like Melodyne and Autotune have come so far, that they're so seamless, you can't really tell if you use it properly, if you don't go too far with it, if you do the right thing. I use it all day long. these days. I mix a lot of stuff. So more convenient for me. I have a studio in my house here, and I can just go upstairs and mix away.
It makes it a lot easier.
So also I'm writing a book.
Well, yeah, that's awesome.
I've done about a third of it so far.
Is that going to be more focused on your experiences with the different artists over the years, or is it going to be more focused on your approach to engineering?
Artists.
Artists, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've always met people and they said, what do you do, by the way? And I say, I'm a producer, I'm an engineer. Who did you work with? Eddie Money. What was it like to work with him? So that's always been the question that people, and I'm finally answering that. So
Yeah.
it's all about my career, but not from the engineering side of the board so much.
Yeah.
It will be about my relationship with the artists and what they were like behind the scenes.
I'm looking forward to that. Do you have any idea when that will be coming out, or?
I'll tell you, I started writing it in 2019, and then COVID happened. And just this last summer, we decided to go back to it, and I got an agent, and now we're getting back to it. And especially things happened like Ozzy dying triggered something in me too. So yeah.
I have the ultimate scent, by the way. You're the engineer on that as well, right?
Well, I was a producer and the engineer and the mixer.
Producer, yeah, that's awesome. Man.
I brought in that song, their big hit too, on that record. They didn't want to do it. That was written by Phil Susan, the bass player, and he lobbied me. He said, check this song out. And I listened to it. I said, that would be perfect. They thought it was too soft.
Yeah, well, but Ozzy on the charts, I think, for the first time in his career.
That's right. And it was his biggest ever single.
Some of the rooms you recorded in became part of the sound itself, whether it was drums, strings, or vocals. Now, when you hear modern DIY recordings tracked in bedrooms or closets, how undervalued do you think the room has become?
It's always been important, specifically for drums.
Yeah, like John Bonham's, for example.
Look, the cool sound is to get away from the drums and have your mics away from the drums. But the drummer has to cooperate because he has to sound like he's mixed himself. In other words, the drummer, if you back away from the drums and the kick drum isn't strong enough, it's not going to be the greatest sound, but if you back away and it sounds like a mix to you, you look for a place in the room where it's balanced. And that's where I put my microphone.
So you don't focus really on that 3-1 rule. You just place it where it feels right.
I move them around. I listen. I move them around until I go for it initially. And if it sounds right for me, otherwise, if I'm not sure, I'll move them around. In the case of John Bonham, when I got to Headley Grange, which is a place they'd already recorded, except this is with the mobile that I built for Ronnie Lane. I got that. The point I want to make is that he knew where he wanted the drums because he liked the sound from Houses of the Holy, which they did some of it there. I think they did it also at a place called Star Groves. I've recorded too, which is another great house. When I walked in, he told me where he wanted the drums, and it was in the hallway. And the hallway had this big high ceiling with like stairs that wound around it, a rectangular kind of thing. And so I started putting mics around the drums, and he went, nope. I said, well, just in case. So I walked around the room while he was playing, and I found a place, if you went up like 8 or 10 stairs on the first landing, I found a place where I liked the sound, and I put 2 mics out there, just like this, about a foot apart. And that's the sound on that record. He wouldn't let me put closer. When he came in to do a test, he liked the way it sounded, and that was it. The only change, during the song Kashmir, I had just gotten my first Eventide phaser, and I had been told that it sounded really good on cymbals, but, the drums are only on 2 tracks. I took one of the tracks, a third, I put it through the Eventide phaser and recorded it on a 3rd track. And they kept it. They loved it. And I didn't know until I heard the record that it was still being used. I mean, because I didn't do the stuff away from Headley Grange. I didn't do the orchestrations, which was done in another studio by a different engineer. So as far as rooms go, let me get into this for a second.
Yeah, definitely.
Because of this mobile truck that I built, it's actually not a truck, it was in an Airstream caravan. I was doing work not just at Headley Grange, but a lot of different houses. The first Bad Company record I did at Headley Grange, but the second one I rented this castle called Clearwell Castle in Monmouth in Wales that was used during the winter for rock bands to rehearse. So I figured where they could rehearse, we could record. So that was that. The third album I did with Bad Company, they were so filthy rich, we had to do it at the south of France. We rented a villa, but Ronnie Lane wouldn't let me bring the mobile over to the continent. So we rented the Rolling Stones truck for that. So each one of those places, imagine 2 old houses, 1 castle with dungeon. They all had different rooms that weren't studio rooms. You could find the place, each one. Now, when I went back to Headley Grange to do the first Bad Company album, Simon Kirke was not this bombastic drummer that Bonham was. So I put those drums in the dining room, not in the hallway. So the first drum sound on the first Badco album is from the dining room. That was because it was more contained. It was more his kind of thing. It was live enough.
Yeah.
He wanted a live sound, but it wasn't so bombastic. If you listen to Free, if you listen to All Right Now, that was done in a really dead studio. You ever listen to the drum sound on that? It's just boom, chick, you know. So I wanted something in between. Yeah, rooms have always been a thing where you go into these houses. I did the first 2 Babies albums. I did in houses with the record plant mobile truck. You know, I did Dave Mason's Mariposa de Oro at his house in Malibu with the record plant remote truck. So I have lots of experience as a producer and engineer going to these places and finding the right sound, even outside. When I listen to the song Bad Company, at the very end of the song in the fade, he goes, "And the cold wind blow," because I had him outside against a wall, and it was like in November or something, and he was cold, and it was, he's a great ad-libber. He just ad-libbed that. I hear that.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of like where he was, where did I forgot. I mean, it's 50 years ago, you know?
Oh, now every time you listen to it, it brings
Right. I hear that. It brings that back to me that, yeah. But I remember how many vocals I did. He was happy with it. I was struggling for a good vocal sound. And when you're outside, it's dry.
Yeah.
And you can add your own. You don't want to color the sound of a vocal. You want it as uncolored as possible so that you can add what you want.
Compared to back then and now, I mean, now you have like all these plugins where, you know, you can add any kind of sound that you want pretty much. And back then you had very limited effects to work with. And now, do you feel that with the unlimited opportunities they have today compared to back then, that it makes it more difficult today?
The menu's huge.
Yeah.
You know, I think a big mistake most people make, especially in like mixing, is they don't make choices as they're going along. We had to make choices. We only had so many tracks.
Yeah.
If I had a guitar part and I had 2 mics on the guitar and a direct and a room or 2 rooms, it would be spread out, right? I'd have to combine those to get a sound. Nowadays, you just leave them, right? That's a bad idea because you're going to have all that to do at the end of the recording when you want to mix. When you mix, you should be just ready to balance, not get sounds for each item.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, especially these days, you don't have to keep that track that you did. If you do a comp track, you can always go back to the originals. You're not going to erase the original stuff. My suggestion is to do, when you got a sound for something, you know, print it, keep it. And you can always go back because you're making too many, just gets out of hand. I'm just talking about one guitar part. If there's 20 guitar parts, imagine that, 100 tracks.
Focused more when I recorded in analog or on the EQ for my sound and, you know, the settings of the EQ. So, and having less effects to work with. I mean, technically, you know, you had foot pedals and everything back when I was growing up, but I mean, you usually recorded, you know, dry and, you got most of your sound from the EQ itself. I mean, you approach it that way too, or do you have any suggestions or do you have any opinion on that?
Are you talking mostly for guitar sounds?
Well, yeah, for me, I'm a guitarist.
You're looking at it from the guitar.
Yeah.
I never looked at it like that. EQ is something that you use to, if something's lacking or there's too much of something, it's not to get a sound, even though, I mean, I do have EQ ranges that I use for certain things. But I think the most important thing is finding the right microphone and then finding the right space wherever it is.
I know moving it around.
Yeah, moving it around, or it just depends. Not for a vocalist. You don't want to move that around, but yeah, it just depends what kind of sound you're looking for.
Have a particular sound in your head already when you go into these projects, or does it change with every band?
It changes every minute. You sit there and listen. You have to be prepared. Just like EQ, you listen first, and then if it needs something, you add it. If it doesn't need anything, you don't add it. People are afraid sometimes to use too much or to take too much out. When I get a tom-tom these days, I take 800 cycles and crank about 15 dB out of it. I like that kind of sound, right? Then I might have to put a couple of 200 in there and a little 5K, and then to brighten it up a little bit. But, I like to pull that middle out of tom-toms.
Yeah. So
there's not many things I do like that, but that's one of the things that I do on a regular basis.
one of your tricks or whatever, what are your...
Well, I learned that from Chris Lord-Alge, who mixed a few things for me in the past. And in fact, he, on his site, which I have on actually my site now, there's a teaching moment where he's talking about where to put room mics for recording drums. And he credits me for teaching him the best place.
Oh, that's awesome.
Very nice. When Chris was mixing my stuff, he didn't mix that much. He mixed a Damn Yankees record for me. He mixed a John Wetton record for me, which came out in great record. It came out in
records.
That came out in '93 when grunge had kind of buried that kind of music.
You mastered the analog world and stepped into digital.
Yeah.
Did that shift change the psychology of the artists you worked with, especially those from that golden era rock scene?
I'll tell you my thoughts on analog and digital. I was very happy with digital, not necessarily for the sonic difference, but for the fact that it was a great tool to use. As a producer, what that allowed me to do was to record a bunch of vocal takes and comp them together without having to go a generation on the vocal and doing a composite vocal. So I wouldn't have to keep punching in on somebody. I wanted a performance, and that allowed me that. And not just for a vocal, for anything. It didn't matter if it was guitar solos, although I wouldn't have been as reluctant to do a comp on analog. I had done that before. But that's one aspect of the fact that it was a tool to use. The other is that as a producer, listening to his final product on vinyl or a cassette, as was right up until 1980 or something, whenever it changed, I would go into a place like the mastering lab, and they would do a metal lacquer right off the tape, and they would send that to the record company, and they would make a mother. That's one generation. Then they'd make stampers to stamp the records. That's another generation. And then they'd use cheap vinyl, maybe, if it was, and you're 3 or 4 generations down from the master tape by the time you put it on the disc.
I'm sure that takes away some of the quality.
Well, I'm the guy that knows, because I can sit there listening in the studio, and then I can A/B it with the record. So the fact that when digital came along and it was a mirror image of the master tape, I was thrilled. I mean, it's a little brittle sometimes, didn't have a little bit of the warmth, it had the clarity, and it had, there's certain compression the tape brings that didn't happen on digital. For me, I guess what I'm trying to say is the good outweighed the bad tremendously for me. A lot of people a little bit older than me started on 4-track. So I started on an 8-track, and to see CDs come out in 1981 or 2 or whenever they came out, I was thrilled. And the other thing is, it was very difficult. I did a band like Jefferson Starship with 4 writers in the band, and you only have 20 minutes. And some of the songs are 4 or 5 minutes, 6 minutes long. One Starship record, I think Freedom at Point Zero had that song, Jane. They were lobbying me about whose song to put on the record because we had too much. We went over 40 minutes, right? So I did a blind vote. I said, everybody put in what songs you think should be on the record, and we'll go from that. And it got me off the hook, right? And in the end, Paul Kantner was trying to do edits to make his songs instead of just going with it, And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is when we got to can go over 40 minutes, which is 2 20-minute sides, the only way to do that is to have a double record. Yeah, that's great. But even then you get weird because I did this really cool album with UFO called Strangers in the Night. There's a song they did at Rock Bottom, which is 13 minutes. And you can't edit that. I mean, it's a live performance. So that means now, in order to facilitate putting all of these things on a disc, you have to change the running order of the concert, which is a very important thing, just like the running order of a CD. When CDs came along, that changed all that because you didn't have the 40-minute limit anymore. There was so many good things about it that outweighed the bad things. Anybody clinging to the fact of the analog thing, to take that into account.
Now, when you're recording today, do you still try to blend both methods, like analog with digital? Like some people like the analog, tape kind of vibe for warmth, like you were talking about, and then you have digital. How do you approach it today?
Oh,
What do you use for like a DAW?
well, microphone is analog. Once something's analog, it's analog.
Yeah.
You record drums, they're analog. If you're using samples, drum samples that are recorded analog, they're analog. So what you're really talking about is that mix down section to be analog. I don't do that. I don't want anybody to think I'm anti-analog. I'm not. But I think as a tool, as for a producer, you have to go with what's going to make the performance the best. I have always thought that these songs should be like live performances.
Can you tell me your change of approach today, now that you're focusing more on using the digital? You mentioned that, it's more used as a tool. And can you give me an idea of your process today?
Today, for instance, like in this era, this past year, I just finished a double album with Jim Peterick from Survivor, an album of duets. And we did it in Los Angeles with my favorite musicians, Denny Funkheiser on drums. We did it at a studio that I'd used for many, many sessions, and it was an analog studio. It went to the Pro Tools platform, which is what I use, which is one of the main recording platforms that people are using. So it went right to digital. It went through a mixing console, a Neve mixing console. So it was all analog up to that point. So that's the way I like to record these days.
With guitars, I'm a guitarist, so I mean, that's probably the best area for me to be able to record and mix. Do you record it with mics still, through mics, or do you record it like direct?
Yes.
Which? Both.
Generally record, I always take it direct, and not necessarily for the sound, but a lot of times for editing. You can see it clearer to know an edit point, even if I'm not using it to mix it in. And I usually have two mics on a cabinet, like a Marshall cabinet, say. If there are two speakers, I mic them. I don't usually mic four speakers. I don't know anybody that does, but I'll mess around with different mics and different speaker cabinets. But I usually combine the two mics, and I might use a little bit of a room mic, and I might use a little bit of the direct. It depends. For an acoustic guitar, I put a mic right like up on the 12th fret. I like to put like a 57, and I like to put a really good tube mic about 24 inches out, and then maybe a room mic out from that. And if it's like a Taylor that's got a really good direct, I'll take that and I'll mix that in a little bit too, but I don't leave it till the end. I'll get that sound right then and there and go with it.
So yeah, it makes me think of, what one of my teachers, he was like, you start out with something, really strong like that, instead of trying to, go back and polish a turd.
My point really in that is that you don't want to leave yourself having to make all those decisions all at the same time. Mixing decisions should just be balancing.
Yeah.
Not getting each sound, that's my point.
That's awesome, man. Ron, when major label budgets backed iconic records, a lot was on the line. Now budgets are lean or non-existent. How has that shift changed how music is made and how it is valued?
You have less time to do it. So that's going to affect it because time is money. Whether you're renting a studio or buying equipment or hiring musicians, if you have less budget. In my case, I just won't do the project if there's not enough to do it the way I think it should be done. And so it doesn't affect me that much from that standpoint, I guess.
I was thinking of that question specifically because, I know you have a lot of people that are, DIY, all doing your stuff.
My A team, Denny Funkheiser and Phil X, who's a great guitar player. He's in Bon Jovi's band. Kim Bullard is my go-to keyboard guy, or Jeff Bova. They're both great. Kim was Elton's guy for 20 years. Elton just stopped touring. And all these guys were on my Jim Peterick project that I did. Also, Tony Franklin, who was in the firm with... So yeah, Tony's my bass guy mostly.
No,
He's the world's best fretless bass player.
agree.
So I have those guys, and all of them do remote work. So I can send a track to any of them, and I do on a regular basis, and they will do it as many times as I need them to do it. It's always great when we get in the studio together, which we did last September or October. We went in with the drummer, bass player, guitar player, keyboard player, and vocals all at once, and did it like we used to.
Yeah.
And they really had a ball, and so did we. And we did that because I had the musicians that I could do that with, where I didn't have to do a lot of overdubs in the end.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier in the final process.
Right.
It's awesome. Yeah, Tony Franklin, he's awesome.
Yeah, he is.
Nice guy, too. He's a really nice guy. You spent months living through the arc of making a record. Have you witnessed an artist transform during that process? Do you recall a specific project where the evolution was profound?
Not usually, but sometimes the album, especially if it's a big hit, transforms the artist. But it happens after I am gone. You know what I mean? So I can see what happened. Now, Bad Company were already stars.
Yeah.
Because they were all in either Matahupo or Free, but I could see them transform from just being English semi-stars to being superstars.
So writing a villa in France, right?
Well, when it came down to that third album, which was the Running with the Pack, they were in a tax bracket in England where they could only spend 63 days a year in England. So unlike the first two albums, we weren't going to do it there. They didn't want to use visa time in the U.S. to do it here. So it was logical to go to a place, and hey, who doesn't want to go to the south of France?
Yeah, right. I agree. When mixing albums that have become cultural landmarks, did you begin technically, or were you first searching for the emotional center of the song?
Mixing is just an extension of the recording. It's the final step. And so I guess the answer that I could give is that I am a very emotional mixer and not a technical mixer. I always start out as an engineer, technical. I'll get the drum sound first. And then I always looked at as the drums were like the tree that you hung all of the other things on. They were the center of it. You got that sound, put the bass up, added the guitars. I'm sure people have their own way of doing things. That's the way I always did it. But once you get into this part of the song, I become more of an emotional mixer. I tend to lean heavily on the vocals, the vocal performances, rather than the technical aspects of the mix. I'm not this genius technical mixer. I have emotional mixes.
Focus more on using your ear rather than the technical side of things, which, as you had mentioned, you'll move the mics around where they feel right, as opposed to, following like the 3-1 rule or whatever.
No, rules don't apply.
So all about using your ear and what feels best for you. And obviously you've recorded some of the greatest albums of all time. What are some of the subtle mix decisions you made that listeners may not consciously notice, but shape the emotional experience of maybe like Bonham's drums or...
Maybe that was something that I just thought it sounded cool, and I wanted to play it back to the band, so I had to record it for that to happen. It fit in with the feel of the track, The original track was actually called Driving to Kashmir.
Okay.
It was, Robert Plant had gone to India, to Kashmir that summer, and this was in the winter of 74. So that's what it was written about. So it had a little bit of that kind of feel, I guess. And, of course, Jonesy came up with I think he wrote the string parts for that.
Yeah, that's an amazing song. Now, many describe the Ron Nevison sound on records like Heart, Chicago, UFO as wide, powerful, and emotional. Do you feel there is a signature to your style? How would you define it, if so?
Getting back to the performance live, I always looked at it as like like the two speakers were a stage. My albums and recordings don't have like dry kind of vocal in your face. I'm far from like somebody who I really admire, by the way, like a Tom Petty, who I adore, by the way, one of my favorite ever artists. So I think that more like a live performances, I would describe my approach. I mixed the Jefferson Airplane at Woodstock. I was on tour with them that summer. If you were there, it was a mess. It was 400,000 people, nothing to eat, in the rain, soggy. It's become just trying to describe the situation there was pretty bad.
We talked about this a little bit. Are there techniques like mic placement, which we did discuss, EQ, philosophy, which we discussed a little bit, gain staging, ambiance, that became pillars of your approach across the decades? I know you talked a little bit about the mic placement and EQ, but
nothing else to, each instrument presents its own, whether it's in the old days, really, when you think about it, we had acoustic piano, which generally you put a microphone in the lower, the left hand and the right hand with the lid kind of up like that. And sometimes you put a room mic up, depending on the kind of mics. I always loved tube mics, like U687 FEG mics were really good too. But when they came out, I like those. And for acoustic guitar, I've described what I do for that.
Yeah.
And the guitar and finding the instrument, what the instrument sounds like, what the drummer sounds like, finding the space for it, picking out microphones and putting them up and then listening and then running back and forth, adjusting the level, the height. Sometimes I'd run out 10 times to just adjust the snare drum microphone, move it around. With a guy like Keith Moon, though, there was no room for a snare drum microphone. He had used up all the room. He had two hi-hats. He had toms everywhere, I had to sneak a mic in, like special stand just for him. What an album used to be in the early days was you'd have singles. And when you got 3 or 4 hit singles, they put it out into an album in the 50s, It's crazy. It sounds crazy now. Yeah. Right.
Well, now a lot of the music today is more or less singles too, because to create an album these days, that's much more logical to release a single, see how that goes.
Singles become, for instance, if you, as a producer like myself, have a lot of hits, that's what you're getting paid on these days because of the downloads, because of the subscriptions. Like I hear Dave Mason's You and Me and We Just Disagree on the radio all the time. And I see it in the royalties that come back, but there's a lot of other songs on that album that I don't see anything from. And so as a producer of hits, so the single song is really the way it is these days. People used to complain about having to buy LPs and to pay for the whole album to get the song they wanted to hear. And it's not the case anymore.
It's never the case with me because a lot of the albums, like the ones that people used to say, a lot of the albums like you did, the whole album was an amazing, experience. So it's like a journey for me, and I knew that when I heard one song off of me, it was going to be the whole entire album, like Physical Graffiti was going to be amazing, for example,
Yeah.
So did your signature sound evolve organically through trial and error, or was it shaped early on by observing other engineers, perhaps during your time around artists like The Who? I know you mentioned that you did mixing on the road for a while, but
my whole life has been trial and error. Everything has been trial and error. I never worked for another producer. As an engineer, when I worked briefly at Island Studios, I had producers there, but I was not the engineer. I was the assistant engineer. When I started doing engineering, the producers were the artists, like Bad Company or like Pete Townsend or like Jimmy Page. I never really worked for producers to get that. So everything that I did personally was trial and error. And that's the way I approach recording. I try things, it's trial and error. And you eliminate enough things and you figure out, I can't think of anything else to do. This must be the result that I was looking for. It's not like I go in looking for anything.
You take it as it comes and just the experience. And
let me just say this: if you're a guitar player, so if you came into my studio, okay, and you sat down next to me with your guitar in your lap, and you said to me, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" Now I have an idea of what I wanted you to do. But I wouldn't say that idea. I would say, well, try something. Because once I tell you what to do, you're going to do that. And then I've lost any thought of you performing anything else.
Yeah.
And so I can always say after a while, when you obviously don't have anything that I like better, I say, well, why don't you try this? So I save that idea. And I do that with everybody, with singers, with any kind of performance. I want to give my idea only, I want you to blow my mind, basically. I want you to trump my idea, okay? And if you can't, I'll come back with my idea. But try to beat my idea first, right? That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I like your approach. Definitely like your approach. Because it allows them to, they don't have any preconceived.
I have time, show me.
Yeah.
And as far as like getting performances out of people, it's a tough process sometimes. And sometimes I have to resort to tactics like intimidation until the artist finally says, well, I'm going to show you. And I'll say, exactly. Thank you.
Challenge.
It's about time.
It's awesome. Yeah, I love your approach. I really do. Now, when you revisit older mixes of your work, do you recognize a technique or mindset younger engineers today could benefit from, especially in a world of unlimited options like we were talking about earlier with the 50,000 plugins?
Yeah, well, I think that we all listen to stuff that we've done in the past. I'm too busy thinking about how it sucks to worry about that, about what I would have done different.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and so I'm very critical. I think we all are critical of our performances, but a lot of times I will hear stuff that I did in the 80s that's got way too much reverb, but that's what I did then.
That's what a lot of people
or way too much synth, and the guitars aren't. I wish I could have another go at mixing Kiss's album that I did, Crazy Nights. Mix it a little bit more for today's, when I hear it back, it sounds good. Performances are good, but the mix is a little bit, and I catch myself. I did it for CHR radio in 1987. I didn't do it for now. I don't know if I can answer your question, about any tips, because I'm so fickle with my own performances that I really don't know.
Yeah, you're always going to go back and have something that you've done better. There's a lot of techniques that you use today, like quantizing, for like the drums and stuff. You could get it like, so much perfection on a track that I think it loses the life and the breath to it, with the technology that we have today, and where you could overcompensate for everything and overdo it.
I think whether it's quantizing or whether it's using auto-tune or Melodyne, all of those things, there's a place for them.
Yeah, they're
and you can't go too far with those, or you'll start ruining the vibe.
Looking back, what era felt the most honest in the recording process? And looking forward, what gives you hope for the future of how music is created and heard?
There's two things that happened around 1980. One was digital, and one was synthesizers. When the Yamaha DX7 came along, the first algorithmic synth. Before that, as a producer, keyboards were acoustic piano, Fender Rhodes, clavinet. There was only a few.
The tunes, yeah.
3. Same thing with other aspects. Those things really changed recording in the 80s when synth came along. Maybe because of that, it was overused because it was new toys.
Yeah.
And they kept getting better and better and better. If I look in the 80s and I see at the beginning and how it went to the end of the 80s, I didn't use any synth till I remember doing an album with Survivor called Vital Signs, had a few big hits on it. And I used this guy, Peter Wolf, and he had all these brand new synthesizers. Peter had all the new stuff, and I loved working with him. That was great. He also did the synth stuff on the Heart record in the next year, which was 84. He worked for me for like 1 or 2 years there. He brought synths to light for me, with his expertise. That changed recording for me anyway. In the 70s, when I had the bands like Dave Mason and the Babies, even UFO, I would get an orchestra. I would have somebody come in and write charts. Every time I think of You with the Babies or Isn't It Time, I had strings and horns on those. Even with UFO, Lights Out, something like Love to Love had an orchestra on it.
Now, if an engineer asks, how do I develop my own sound? Where would you tell them to begin? taste, restraint, curiosity, or risk?
Trial and error, the way I did. Put stuff up, listen to it, get feedback from other people, learn from other people. You know, the musician that you're sitting next to, he might tell you, I don't like that sound. Who are you working for? You know, are you working for a producer? Are you working for the artist? And then you have to start finding the sound. The more experience you have, the more it takes you to the right place. Depends on if you can. See, I didn't come up through a class like you did. I didn't go to recording school. I don't know what they're teaching at recording school. I have no idea. I came totally different way. When I got to Island Studios in 1970, I had spent 2 years mixing sound on the road. I knew about microphones, but I only knew about live microphones. I knew about preamps, but live preamps. I knew about all of the other things. I knew about rudimentary limiters and processors, but I didn't know about the good condenser mics, and I didn't know how that related to recording. So that's the part that I had to learn, the recording part of it. So I can't really answer. I didn't go through it like most people do, but I think that's had an effect on my career and how everything sounds in the end.
More of an organic approach. You know, back then, I don't know if they had any classes at all on mixing or recording or anything like that back then. So you had to rely completely on trial and error, as you're mentioning, and using your ear, what sounded best to you. And as a result of that, we have some of the greatest albums of all time. Finally, your lifetime of making records, what is the one piece of advice you would give to someone walking into the studio for the first time today?
Let me just say that one of the cool aspects of doing remote recording, whether it's the Record Plant Remote Truck or the Ronnie Lane Mobile that I did, going into a house, is there was no intimidation factor. You weren't walking into Air Studios or Olympic Studios in London. You weren't walking into the record plant. You're in a living room. So that helped relax everybody. And so I think the only thing I can say, the very first thing is relax and let it happen. You know, don't be intimidated.
It's awesome. Thank you for sharing your time.
Okay.
You know, this is
Pleasure.
an honor, to get to talk to you.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.